Okay, so we have Stephanie Vigil here with us today. She helped put these bills together. These are her bills, SB 24 and HB 24. One is the TNC Act and one is the DNC Act. For one is transportation, one is delivery. Um, there's a couple of things. I guess first thing we should probably do, Stephanie, we should probably tell everybody in case they don't know, is that we had a town hall here, and a lot of people have their events in different states, but this one was very, I think, unique. We had people in from all over the country who are very concerned about this kind of stuff too, and took it back to their own states. I think we had a really good collective meeting that day. It was really positive. There was nothing negative about the day. Senator Priola even showed up. I mean, the works. It just everybody was there and everybody was into the moment. And I felt like we all left that really good. And that was before these had been enacted to law. Do you want to quickly bullet point us through what each of these acts do? Like we don't need to get in deep because you can go find other podcasts I've done with Stephanie where we've talked about this.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And I should clarify too, the Senate Bill 75, I didn't actually prime sponsor in the House. I was in some of those conversations, but I will say Representatives Ricks and Bacon carried that really faithfully when it got to the House. But I did carry the delivery
But would
bill.
it have
Yeah.
happened without you?
Well, I don't know. That's fair. No, I mean, I think
That's kind of what I'm getting at, because
well,
a
that's
lot of
kind of
these
you to say.
politicians, and I'm not saying they're bad, they just don't understand what the
Yeah.
reality is of this stuff.
Yeah, well, so, kind of rewinding a little bit, we had also, and you probably recall this, we had run a single bill for the whole works in
Mhm.
2023, which was my first legislative session at the beginning of my term. And it just kind of fell apart on the Senate side, right? We kind of got sabotaged, and that building is crawling with big business and corporate lobbyists. They tend to get their way a lot because they've got their fingers in every pot, and they know the whole institution really well because they're not term limited like lawmakers are. So, just side note there that this is this is how lobbying affects so much of what we do.
Mhm.
But the main drive behind both of the bills, if you'll pardon the pun, is that as long as we are operating in this space, right, where we have independent contractors doing delivery and rideshare work, and the companies that run the platforms are a platform that connect you to other businesses, that they need to tell the truth they need to provide some critical information. They need to tell the truth to their drivers. They need to tell the truth to consumers. They need to allow people to make informed, real world informed decisions. It shouldn't be gamified. It shouldn't be impossible for you to direct your own work. And you shouldn't have to face, arbitrary deactivations or other forms of punishment or discipline because you're not an employee. They need to respect that. If that's what they want, if that's what we're all going to do, it needs to go both ways.
And
So that, yeah.
just to note this, every one of them, you know this, but and most of these listeners will know this. Every one of these gig apps says we're independent contractors in their own
So,
TOS.
mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
So it's not even like we're arguing employment status. They say it
Yep.
themselves.
Yep. Oh, and they want it, even more
Oh
than the
yeah.
drivers do, right? They don't want to have hired employees, and I get it. That's how this system works. But it's been interesting working with them as a lawmaker because really early on, so I got to tell you, like the day that I sat down for new legislator orientation in like late 2022, I haven't been sworn into office yet. I haven't pulled a bill title for anything, let alone big stuff like for this. And I start getting calls from their lobbyists, from Uber's lobbyists, from Lyft's lobbyists going like, "Hi, congratulations on your win. I heard you have a bill. We really want to talk to you about it." And I was like, wow, you guys are intense. I don't have a bill yet, but I might. We will talk to you when the time is appropriate. But it was just fascinating how much they would be like, well, we haven't seen a draft yet. And if we haven't seen a draft, then you can't introduce it. And just honestly, a little bullying. But some of it was like really well intended, right? Like, hey, there's a lot of money tied up in this. My client, whether that was Uber or DoorDash or somebody, has these following concerns. And I would be like, what I hear you saying is that you don't have enough information to make decisions about your work and you feel like it needs to be shared with you. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Right.
And isn't that rich?
Yeah.
Isn't that rich?
Yeah.
So,
So on these bills, though, I mean, one of the things that we've talked on this many times before you were in office, during your time in office, at the town, I mean, many times, is that it wasn't going after what California and Washington State, Seattle, New York, um, any of the other states, they all have their own versions of trying to bring a dollar amount to your time or your active time. I am so
Yeah.
against the term active time. I think it's ridiculous. There's real time in my world. That's it. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, when they do that and they say 120% of minimum wage in the city or for your active, like to me, those are all just like you were just saying, gamified. It's not, that is not minimum wage. You're not turning on an app and getting paid minimum wage. You're turning on an app and hoping that what if they don't send you any orders? You make $0.
Right.
So it has nothing,
Right.
and this had nothing to do with that. This was about
Sure.
transparency and don't deactivate people for no reason.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, the like active versus passive time and minimum payment and all those sort of things, they're debatable for a reason, right? This is why we don't have a lot of consensus across the gig driving world about how to proceed with that. Some people are actually super into it, right? They want to be like, go have minimum payment per mile or per order delivered or whatever they want to do. I personally, I do think it's difficult too, because when I've been doing this work, I'm multi-app and I don't know how you would even be able to navigate that. I don't know how you'd be able to splice that. So we just really wanted to focus on the things that we know are hurting drivers the most and that aren't working within the system as it purports to exist, right? It purports
Yeah.
to exist as a network that connects independent drivers with other merchants in the case of delivery and with passengers in the case of rideshare, and to facilitate those transactions. So they are not the business. You as the driver are the business. And
Yeah.
so to me, that was the thing we really needed to focus on. And I'm glad we got there because we had kind of an interesting coalition of like some organized labor and some economic justice folks and variety of different voices in the mix. And I really appreciated that we were all able to come together for that town hall summit because it was such a good like meeting of the minds
It
for
was.
everyone
And
who's coming
it
at this
really
from different
was.
angles.
And it was
I
people who do
Yeah.
this full time in different markets across the country. I mean, that's not really something that happens in this space.
Right, right. So
So it
yeah,
was,
no, we definitely kind of hit the sweet spot in Colorado, and of course, now we know how all of those negotiations came to roost because after all of the many months of negotiating with Uber, with Lyft, with TechNet, which is like a big conglomeration of big tech lobbyists, um, they got to neutral. We actually had to come to a neutral position. We were having trouble passing the bill without an agreement of neutrality. And so it is awfully rich for Uber to sue the state over our bill at this juncture. After all of the conversations we went through that they were going to move to a neutral position, hours and hours and hours, Steve. I have never spent so long on a bill as I did with this one,
I'm
arguing
sure.
with opposition about what, right, like we would give a little and they would give a little maybe, but then like we really had to kind of document everything. I started just one of our lobbyists on our side was thankfully really organized in this regard. We were like, we've got to treat this like you're dealing with a bad landlord, right? Get everything in writing so that nobody can say you didn't have an agreement, or so that nobody can say that you didn't talk about this thing or that thing. I mean, we went back and forth with them. We spent hours and hours, and they still now they're just going to say that all of these concerns that they had were never addressed, which is not true. That they feel it's an attack on their First Amendment rights, which isn't a serious argument, and it didn't come up in any of
We
our
also did not mention
conversations.
that they waited
Like,
until the 11th hour,
oh yeah, oh of
which is their
course,
playbook exactly. Like
yeah,
they knew this was happening. This is no surprise.
yeah,
Like you said, you spent all this time making it happen.
yep,
Then it got enacted. They knew this was happening.
hmm, yeah,
So yeah, I mean, let's move into this 51-page lawsuit because I mean, I'm just the length alone blows me away.
yeah, yeah.
And like
Sorry, I'm
you
not
were
laughing
saying,
because it's funny. It's just so it's so rich. It's so like on brand for them, right? To suddenly have all these demands and just anyway.
but
Yeah.
so the free, yeah, I mean, please as the insider, tell me what this free, like this, First Amendment thing is. Like how, like the font down to time, content and font. It seemed like the font was brought up a few times. Like is this lawsuit basically because the rider or customer was going to get the breakdown as well?
I think that's the big part, right? They don't want to tell their consumer, they don't want to tell the end consumer that, there are times when you might pay like $50 for a ride and your driver is getting 20 of it, right?
Yeah, I think you're
Especially
being nice for
considering,
one.
well,
50,
yeah,
it could be
whatever. I'm
12.
making up a
Yeah,
number
okay.
here, right? And yeah. I definitely can think of some times where, like, I don't use rideshare down where I live very much, but because I'm in Colorado Springs, but in Denver, there would be times where, like, I would have to, get a cab to the Capitol in a hurry, and I would always have this practice of being like, "Hey, I'm just curious if you're willing to tell me how much did Uber offer you for this ride?" And it was constantly just like, man, like this is just justifying why I'm carrying legislation like this. Because the crazy thing too, and this is like, I think people don't get this in the public until you break it down for them. Like, all of the overhead, all of the real world overhead for that service has to be taken out of what's being paid to the driver. Uber's not covering any of that for you. It's your
Exactly.
car, it's your gas money, it's your insurance, it's your data plan. All of it is coming out of the driver. So I think people just didn't know too is the thing until this started to be a thing. So now they've got a whole, oh, you'll be shaming us into basically we will feel ashamed socially out there in the world for how much we are fleecing the public for these rides. And they don't want to admit that. They don't want to own up to that. And it was just such an interesting, yeah, I think they do use the word shame and they're kind of like, you're shaming us into,
Yeah, the shame is used
saying what we,
multiple times in here.
shaming, my goodness. I mean, you may as well say that, well, I guess they would probably make the same argument. You may as well say that like major food producers are being shamed into admitting how many artificial dyes and whatnot are in their food. It's like, well, then either don't put it in there or put it in there and disclose it. But that's not an argument
I,
for why the public doesn't deserve to know.
I think the word shaming was they couldn't find another. I mean, what is another word other than we don't really want to share the honest details with you? I mean, and
Right,
they
right,
can't write that.
right, right.
I mean, but that's how I took it. I'm like, it took you guys probably days to come up with shaming because everything else just looked just as bad.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
Well,
any
so see,
wherever I saw it, it
here's
was
the
like there's no
thing.
word that could replace it.
Yeah, I know, right? I think here's the thing about this lawsuit that I do think is really troubling. One, I don't think it's going to fly, right? I don't think they're going to get away with it. But
Hmm.
I think there's kind of something to understand about like lawfare when people want to start like this is war, right? We've challenged them. They're going to throw down. We're going to write everything that is published or put on record in the course of this, like just becomes fodder for them for later, right? So, however we fight back against it, whatever it kind of takes for it to go away, they're going to borrow from that for their next lawsuit, whether it's in this state or somewhere else. It's going to become, content for them to use for fighting another bill somewhere else. And it's also like there's also going to be has to at some point be a federal element here. I don't have a lot of confidence that the new administration is going to care very much about protecting consumers or workers from corporate overreach. Like we're probably going into a pretty dark time in that regard. But we have to keep pushing on it because, like, right, like I know we talked about this when I've been on your show before. Like we're living in a second Gilded Age here.
Sure.
It looks really good on the outside how much economic growth there is and new shiny things and miraculous technology. But the reality is that like a very very rich powerful few are using it to gouge the rest of us. And it's not like we haven't been down this road before. We know eventually what needs to happen is that cycle needs to be interrupted to give people their power back. But that's going to be a long road ahead of us for now. And I feel like if you're not pushing at a state level where like bills actually get passed and we can actually
Hmm.
do something, then we don't have a lot of hope for getting it done at a federal level. So full steam ahead.
So, okay, so this, I know we were a little off camera talking about this too. So this, I mean, most likely or hopefully, however we want to put it, this is not going to win in court. If this doesn't win in court, their lawsuit against the state, then what happens? I mean, obviously the law stays in place. Do you see Uber leaving? Do you see Uber just not paying the bills kind of thing? Like, well, we'll just operate. And if you got a problem with it, then sue us. Or do you think that this is the case? And if they lose it, they'll play ball.
Well, we're already starting to see, and I've had some screenshots sent to me from drivers, and no doubt you have as well, that
Hmm.
they're starting to punish the drivers to have a go at us, right? Like just taking away supportive services and things like that.
Oh yeah.
And, claiming that, well, because of the new law that was passed, we just can't afford it, and just usual games, right? Stuff that big business
But the
players
thing that you're
always do.
talking about, I even have the screenshot right here ready, but the thing that you're talking about that they put into the app, the 4 things they're removing have nothing to do with the law.
I know.
And
I
so,
know.
like, I get that they don't like drivers. I get that they don't care about us. I get that they've lied for years saying there's autonomous coming next year, next year, next year. It's not coming for a long time. I've even heard of people who are investors in Uber saying we need more detail on this. How many drivers are there and can they earn a living wage? Because they're
Right.
like, because if they can't, autonomous is not around the corner and this is not going to ever make us money.
Right.
And so, I mean, but what it seems weird that in a time when they're suing the state, not the state suing them, they're also thrashing out at drivers. It just seems mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a time
Well,
when you would want the drivers with you.
Well, sure. I will say, it's a clever trick in some regards because it's going to work on some number of people, to basically be like, oh, unintended consequences. These like well-meaning lawmakers passed a bill thinking they were doing you a favor, and now they forced the company to cut back on services to balance the books, and poor sad multimillionaires, right, can't figure out how to tell us the truth without paying for it somewhere. And of course they can. We know that they can. We wouldn't be asking for this if we didn't know that they could. And it's not like we didn't consult with, a wide variety of tech experts on whether or not the coding is possible, because of course it is. So I think it's a cheap trick that big business likes to use, right? To tell their consumers that you can't treat the workers right or it'll cost you too much, and then turn around and tell the workers, if the government changes how we have to treat you, we're just going to reduce your hours or take away compensation or something.
Right.
Yeah, I don't, it arguably isn't that good of a move, but they also say in the complaint a number of times, and I think this is so fascinating, that they see the drivers as their customers, which isn't entirely incorrect. I mean, I don't think that's exactly the right alignment, but certainly, like, yeah, they're recognizing in this that they're supposed to be competing for your attention. They're supposed to be competing for your labor, which, if it were actually working out that way, fantastic. But I think we all know that any market where you have like two players who control 99% of the market share, like, that's not a real competition. So if they're really there to like compete for your attention and compete for your labor, then they would want to tell you more things, you would think, right?
And they would
Like
also want to
actually
limit
earn
the
it.
amount of drivers on the platform.
Right. But they actually like to churn and burn, right?
Yeah.
So, which, right. And like Amazon does the same thing, and all the delivery apps do the same thing. And,
Yeah.
um, you know, so
So how, if you had to put it in a percentage, I mean, while we sum this up, what do you think? I mean, what do you think the percentage is that this case gets kicked down? Like, no, this is not a good case. It's not happening.
I mean, I certainly feel really good about them not getting their emergency injunctive relief.
Hmm.
I think in terms of, trying to like win the longer term case, in regards to First Amendment rights, I think it's a non-starter. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't like give a
Right. And you
percentage.
never
We
know
do
what
have
could
our
happen in a
lawyers on
court of
it,
law.
right?
Right.
And certainly, yeah, and certainly the AG's office is going to defend our law. They're really, they're really good at what they do. The Attorney General's office is who defends the state or any department of the state when they've been sued. I think they'll do a good job with it. I don't know if I'm comfortable like quoting a specific percentage, but I think what everybody needs to keep eyes on is that the information that comes out during this is always really important, right? What is said
Sure.
in court, what's filed in the responses, like all of the talking points, everything that is like admitted to or alluded to or cited and all of that, like it all just kind of is becoming fodder for the next action.
Right.
So, that's
Right. Even a
that's
loss
kind
to
of how
Uber
you
isn't
how
a
you play it.
loss. It's just a reason to get twice as many lawyers and come back.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So,
100%, right.
um,
So, and I'll just mention too, and this is just kind of one of those things. It maybe is very like too inside baseball, but I think it's important for people to pay attention to. There's kind of like a shifting dynamic in the state legislature where, we've got a majority party caucus and there's a minority party caucus, but it actually, like, you need 33 votes in the House and 18 votes in the Senate, and for the governor to sign off on it to pass a bill or to kill a bill. And those 33 votes in the House, for instance, can come from anywhere. It could be all of the minority and just like a certain sliver of the majority caucus. And so there's kind of like an alternate unaligned majority that exists. And they might have more power than we realize they do. And they might be willing to be a lot more corporate friendly than we would like. And so that's just kind of something I think people need to think about too. Even if you kind of think to yourself, like, oh, well, no, I've got one of those like pro-worker, liberal Democrats for my state rep. I don't need to shake them down about anything. Like, get on everybody. You need to get on everybody about whether or not they're supporting workers and whether or not they're supporting worker rights and whether or not they're supporting like true economic opportunity, because we don't necessarily know that we can just trust people who look like friends.
Oh, 100%. So the last thing that I just before we go here, I do want to say this because you said it before we came on, and it's something that's talked about in our community a lot. I've said this for a long time. You just confirmed it before we came on, is that they do watch my podcast and other
Hmm.
podcasts.
Yeah.
100%. I've known this for years, but they
Hmm.
absolutely do. In fact, we won't get into it, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and just say what we were talking about before we came on here was they didn't get. I mean, they watched it, but they didn't. We didn't say or what they were thinking. Like that.
Oh
They're
yeah.
they're also misinterpreting too.
Oh yeah.
So
Well, and again, like what was I saying about the, kind of the lawfare game, right? They're filing their lawsuit to see what'll stick and what won't, and see kind of what comes up in the responses and what's said in the media about it, what you and I say about it, and everybody else. And all of that is just going to become fodder for later. And they did the same thing and just kind of trolling around through, things you had to say on your show and things that I put up, because I'm very publicly communicative as a public figure. I put out a lot of press releases and newsletters and things like that. I try to over communicate, because otherwise people don't generally know what state legislatures are up to. And so, they kind of took that, and instead of like listening to understand, they're listening for ammunition, right?
yeah,
And so what they ended up coming away with was, well, we heard you on a podcast last year where you said you weren't going to work with us at all. And I'm like, I definitely didn't say that. I definitely didn't say
that
that.
there it is,
And I
guys.
would never say that. Not
No,
because it's not a smart thing to say, but because it's not what I think. It's not how I operate. I was always going to have a thorough stakeholder process with y'all.
yeah, and I
Um, you know,
neither of us would ever say that because nothing would get done.
Oh, it's not how you, it's just not how you do things. Now,
So
what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to, roll over and give everything to oppositional figures before I even introduce a bill. And that's not, I don't think that's some sort of like sneaky or underhanded way of doing business. It's just kind of what makes sense to me has made sense to me as a public figure, to stand in my values and, work on a bill, that I actually think is worth passing, that isn't just fluff and that isn't just tinkering around the edges. And so I'm proud of this bill. If your listeners don't know, I did fall a few votes shy of reelection, literally 3 votes away from getting reelected, but I will be right back. And I think the fact that the state is getting sued by big tech over my bill says we got some good stuff done while I was there. So
yeah, oh, I fully agree. And by the way, there will be a lot of people who will be sharing this, and they've been asking me what they can do in their states. So hopefully this gets some noise, because these other bills in other states don't really appeal to me. They don't even, just right out of the gate, I'm like, I sense problems. But with this one, I don't sense a problem. Like, be honest, just be transparent, and let's talk about people you deactivate. How hard
yeah.
is that?
Yeah.
It's called
Well, I will
ethics.
say the TNC bill, and where a lot of their complaints are coming from, does have the disclosures to the division, that component of things that they need to give, that they have to give like a certain summary report of information about how they do business in our state to the Division of Labor Standards and Statistics. We
Yeah,
didn't end up with those disclosures on the delivery side because we just had a different set of negotiations about what did and didn't make it into the final bill. But that is something that they'll have to start. I think that actually might be their biggest beef, because the last thing they want to do is start providing useful information to a division that's meant to protect workers, so that they actually have enough information to work with. And that's something that was a concern to me well before I got into office, was finding out that TNCs operate under the supervision, or under the regulatory oversight of the Public Utilities Commission, which was a way to kind of like get Uber and Lyft and the like to replace taxi cabs, because that's where taxi cabs have generally been regulated, is through the PUC, and also to keep it away from labor protections. Right. You've put it under the PUC. The Public Utilities Commission is a 3-member board. They're appointed by the governor. They're usually pretty tight with big business like oil and gas and the like, and they provide whatever amount of oversight they're going to provide, but they're not there for, they don't understand labor law very well, and they don't understand worker protections very well. And so it was never going to be sufficient to have the PUC be like the only governing entity that really puts any oversight on these companies. And so that shift had to start happening some way or another, and they don't want that.
No.
So
hopefully this just loses. I mean, I hope it's quick and painful and that it just loses right out of the gate, because it should. I mean, even this, it's just, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, and to me, it just seems ridiculous when I read it. So,
no.
Stephanie, thank you for putting these together, because without you, we wouldn't even be having this argument with Uber suing the state right now. So even though that's happening, this wouldn't be happening. So thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for being on the podcast multiple times. Sure. And yeah, everything you've done has been a bonus to all of us drivers. So we'll continue the fight with you and for you, and we'll make noise too. All of us make different types of noise, but we'll make noise.
All right. Thanks so much, Steve. It's always good to see you. And thanks again for having me on your program as usual.
Always. Thank you, Stephanie.